Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it is. A very warm welcome to you. We are delighted today that we have with us Professor Maria Juenger, who is professor, and I'll probably mess this up, but the Ernst Cockrell Jr. Centennial Chair in Engineering #2 at the Faribor's Massey Department of Civil Architecture and Environmental Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Juenger needs absolutely no introduction. All of you know her or know of her at least. She's done a huge number of really, really cool projects, published a lot of amazing work, chemical issues in cement-based materials, hydration chemistry of cements, SCMs, including ASCMs, and durability and deterioration processes in concrete. She is a ACI fellow and ACERS fellow, and she's won a number of awards as well. She is also the president of ACI. So it means a lot to us that she's taking time out from her incredibly busy schedule to come talk with us. So thank you very much, Maria, for doing this, and it's all yours.
Thank you. I was actually excited when Prannoy asked me to give this webinar, but it was challenging to find a date. So I feel like we scheduled it months ago and here we are. So I'm glad that this date is still open because I really wanted to get your perspectives and talk to you. So Prannoy asked me to talk about service, and I made this presentation, which I called it the neglected academic expectation. The reason I call it neglected is so many people say, when you are a graduate student, you're trained to do research, but you're not trained to teach. And people bemoan that fact that, oh, we're never trained to teach. But I mean, some people are, but most of us, the focus is on research. Teaching is neglected. Service is neglected even more than teaching. Nobody even jokes about it. It's so neglected. So what I wanted to talk about is a little bit about service, kind of an overview. I also will note, like, this slide is the most plain type slide that you can get in PowerPoint. I decided to be anti-AI, anti-university and other templates that people generally use, because this is coming from me and not from ACI and not from UT Austin. It's just really, I'm talking about my experiences. And so I wanted it to be, sorry, hold on a second. I wanted it to be really about sort of open-ended and not particularly about representing those perspectives. Okay. The other part of this is the reason, so we think about research, we think about teaching, we know that those are part of our expectations for promotion. Service is also an expectation for promotion in most of our universities, but we're not really taught much about what it means and what you should do. The message that I got, and again, since I've been at this 23 years, my perspective is different than your perspective of what you're being told versus what I was told. But what we were generally told was do service, but don't do too much, especially coming up for assistant professor. When you're coming up for full professor, it's a slightly different story. But what does it mean? And it's not really well defined about how you should proceed when you try to commit to different types of service. Okay, so like with everything that we have in our academic world, all of the faculty job expectations make for good jokes. I like this PhD comics. The one on the right is particularly funny to me because most people think that we don't work in the summer, all we do is teach. And so the research and service isn't even part of the general public's perspective of what faculty do. So just even considering that balance, that since academics are in theory just teaching and have free summers, that there's no concept generally that we're even expected to do service. I have a lot of neighbors that ask me constantly, what I'm doing in the summer and when does the semester start and that sort of thing. And I'll say, I'm not teaching this semester because I'm working for an organization. And I feel like they don't really understand what that means. On the flip side of that, we have a huge benefit for doing something like what I'm doing now for ACI president, that since I have this balance of research, teaching, and service, I can change that balance. As a full professor, I can change that balance and request that service is a bigger chunk of my pie. Research is still there. It can't ever go away, but my teaching is minimal at this point for this year. So we can shift that balance. People who work for companies don't have that flexibility. The other joke is things like this, that you have a particularly defined balance on the one on the left. But of course, the definition of what a department expectation is certainly different than what is actually written down on paper, and then how we would like to spend our time is that's cute. But I would say right now, if you look at that, how do departments expect you to spend their time? I would say service is huge for me, and research is smaller, and teaching is aside. So one of the things about our jobs too is we often treasure our flexibility. And so we like the flexibility of being able to define the balance of research, teaching, and service. We like the flexibility of being able to define how we spend our time. I personally love not having a boss who's telling me what to do. But then, this type of flexibility is a double-edged sword. So Kevin Folliard, who's in my department, stood up at one point or said something once that stuck with me, which was, yeah, the flexibility of being a professor is great. You can work whatever 80 hours a week you'd like to work. So in this particular study that I have shown here, adds up to more like 60 hours a week, which, is still considerable. But one thing that I'd like to note is that the balance from this survey, the balance of how people spend their time certainly bleeds into the weekend. So it's a double-edged sword that we are generally all working on the weekend to varying degrees. And this is a lot of information, but this is what I think is pretty actually interesting, because it breaks down what we do in the week versus what we choose to do in the weekend. And so if you start looking at this, the things that I think are interesting here is this class preparation is 12.2% in the weekday, but 23% of the weekend. And the course administration, again, 10% during weekdays, 12.9% on weekends. And so what this is basically suggesting is that things that we prioritize less tend to be done in what bleed into what we would call our spare time. So that includes teaching, because we're prioritizing it less because we're told to prioritize research, and it's easier to catch up on that during the weekends. But also, when I look at all these different categories they have here, I can't figure out which one of these is actually service. So I wanted to look at this and say, okay, well, yes, it's clear that we're spending more time on our weekends dealing with teaching because we're dealing with research more and the actual process of instruction during the week. But I don't really know how to break these particular numbers down into a concept of what is considered service. And I think that's also because service tends to be pretty poorly defined. Okay, so how do we define service? I pulled this other thing off the internet, which breaks service down at least a little bit. So it breaks down categories more than just research, teaching, and service, as including advising and mentoring, and then discusses some concept of university service versus discretionary service. I'm going to open the chat just to see what's in there, but okay, so those are questions for later. I'm going to ignore those for now. That's what I was assuming. So we have this discretionary service and university service. Still, those values still add up to 23, 24%, like in the previous survey, but at least it's broken down into what we consider service to the university, which really is quite mandatory in terms of part of our job, and discretionary service, which is in many cases considered optional, except you're still reviewed on it. So if we look at this, what I think about in terms of university, we can break it down into what we do for, I wrote area/department. My department's huge. And so we have 57 FTEs ish in that range. And so we're broken down into smaller areas so you can do service for your area. So for example, structural engineering or materials, or you can do service to the department. And then college, school, or unit, we use this term CSU a lot at UT Austin because we arbitrarily call things colleges and schools. The Cockrell School of Engineering, where I work, used to be the College of Engineering until the Cockrell Endowment, and then they decided they didn't want to call it Cockrell College, so they just chose school arbitrarily. So we have absolutely arbitrary distinctions. And then we have some units that are not departments or schools or colleges. They're more like research centers, so it's different naming. And then things that are holistically toward the entire university as a whole. I also these are my categories. These aren't anything that I pulled across, but things that are reviews. So reviewing proposals, manuscripts, programs at your own university or elsewhere. Recommendation letters, these are reviews of people. So including promotion and tenure letters and that type of thing. I consider that a service type activity. We also have as what many of us are doing, these professional organizations, committee, conference session chairing, that type of thing. And then things like outreach, the K through 12, sorry, I have a typo there, and public type outreach that you have, or even things that are broader, like position statements or op-eds that go to a bigger, broader audience, and policy related things that many of us are doing. They're not research, so I would say they fall into this category of service. Okay, but the boundaries between these are murky. And sometimes it gets really tricky. The one at the bottom, particularly for me, is a murky one on that bulleted list. When you go to a conference, are you doing research or are you doing service? Because no matter what, even if you go, for example, to ACI and you don't go to a single session, you just go to technical committees, you're learning something that's relevant for your research because you're having conversations with people that give you new ideas that potentially spur collaborations. And so while you're on a committee doing service, you're also benefiting your research. The same with manuscript reviews. I pick and choose which papers I review based on when I'm asked to review a paper, am I interested in it? And so yeah, I learn a lot about research from manuscript reviews. You learn a lot about how to write a paper, how not to write a paper. These things or even grant proposal reviews. It's not about the idea, obviously, but you're learning what makes a proposal successful. So you're doing service to the community, but you're also benefiting your own research at the same time. So a lot of these boundaries, if you look at the figure there, I'm not sure these are really the categories that we would use for our field, but it says triple the benefits without tripling the work. So a lot of these types of activities really combine things. So I struggle again with the concept of student supervision or mentoring. It's teaching, but it's also research. And so it's also service if it's someone else's student. So these boundaries are really murky, which works to our benefit. Okay, I found when I was just messing around on the internet, I found this thing that this person in geophysics had posted on LinkedIn. And I thought it was kind of interesting, so I screenshotted it and provide information about who it is here. But I found it interesting because this is basically a statement of what he did or they did. I don't know if it's a he or she, but let's say they. It's a statement of what they did to actually achieve tenure in geophysics. And so it talks about how many courses they taught, that they had above average student evaluations. But let's skip to the service. So the service expectation, so this person's being public about what they did pre-tenure. They were a journal editor. I think that's a lot. They took leadership roles in professional associations, and they were department undergraduate council chair, whatever that means. So they had things that were within the department, but then also things that were benefiting the greater community. And so the question is that degree necessary? And I think it's very hard to answer that question. But what I would say, the expectation, at least from my end and in my university as well, the expectation pre-tenure is that you contribute, but you don't have to show leadership at the point pre-tenure. After tenure, you need to start developing leadership and service, but pre-tenure, you don't need to be doing leadership activities. You really need to be focused on really just getting exposure. And so I'm going to show you what I ended up doing for fun was I went back through each one of my annual reports starting in 2003 and looked at what kinds of committees I was on to get a sense of what I had pre-tenure, to put it in context for what, just to put it in context of what I've done later. Because sometimes you look at someone who's far into their career and you say, oh, they've done so much, but we all had to start somewhere. So in my particular department, there's a strong emphasis on you do minimal inside university and inside department service. So when I was as an assistant professor, I was on some departmental committees. So for example, inviting seminar speakers, graduate student recruiting, which benefits you because you get to meet the students who are being recruited. The college committees I was on were also of interest. So women in engineering program type colleges. We put all of our assistant professors on what's called the Distinguished Lecturer Committee, which means they work to bring in a faculty member who might write them letters later. So it is very targeted internal service and not excessive, with the idea that you want to contribute, but you don't want to be overloaded as an assistant professor. The other thing I noticed when I looked back at my annual reports is how much outreach I did. All kinds of kids' summer camps and high school kids coming to campus doing honors camps and Girl Scouts and I don't know who, what, the learning activities for mature people that they have at UT, to give lectures to senior citizens who want to do continuing education and all kinds of outreach. So I was actually surprised to remember how much I had done at that point and how actively engaged I was at that point in outreach. It was a nice sort of trip down memory lane. Of course, we all do manuscript reviews, grant proposal reviews and panels. That helps us learn that process. Many of us, and I laughed, I even spoken to someone about this last week, many of us join the ASCE Journal of Materials and Civil Engineering as associate editors at the assistant professor stage, or editorial board. I don't remember what they call it now. Sending out papers for review. And I laughed in this conversation last week because when I started, it was so old school that we sent emails to ask people if they'd be willing to review, but then we sent them the papers on paper in an envelope, and I had to mail them back. It was crazy. I found that really absurd at that point, but yeah. I also co-chaired an ACI session, so I didn't do much. I just co-chaired. It wasn't a lot. I was a ACI committee secretary of 236 toward the end of my time as assistant professor. And I also joined the Ceramic Society leadership of the Cements Division, where I joined as many of you know, you start as secretary, and then chair-elect, and then chair. At that point, that was it. So you do that 3-year term. And so I started that process as an assistant professor. So you can see that a lot of activities that I was doing at that point were really geared toward building a community of within service to try to engage with the community and get to know people better. So that's really what that was targeted toward, and learning better how to do my job by doing so. So as an associate professor, the amount of service internally steps up. So for example, things like faculty search committee chair, lab director, that just means in our lab that we have a building and several faculty share it. And so we have to take turns doing the annoying parts of managing the lab. At that point too, I started to get involved with university faculty governance, but not in a faculty council, faculty senate way, but specifically for the faculty committee we have for graduate programs. We call it graduate assembly. So that's a university level committee. And then I also became a committee chair within that. I think I chaired several committees within that assembly and got to know people across the university really well, which was nice. With ACI, often if you are secretary, at some point you may move into a chair position. So I became the chair of the ACI 236 committee. Often I always thought this was associated until I'm actually the one doing board committee appointments. But it was my impression that once you get ACI fellow, then somebody realizes that you are interested in ACI and they put you on a board committee. Now that I've appointed people to board committees, it's not exactly how it works, but I tried to instigate that as well. I co-hosted the ACERS conference. So during this time, we moved it away from the Ceramic Society larger MS&T conference, and we created our own smaller conferences, and we established that trajectory of secretary, chair-elect, chair, program, or conference host that hadn't existed before then. But then, so we started that process. I had already been through my leadership track, but Zach Gracely was targeted at hosting it, and we decided to have it in Austin instead of College Station. And so I co-hosted that conference. I also joined RILEM and became a working group chair in RILEM and got engaged in that community. So again, being broader, bigger, expanding the scope as an associate professor, I joined the Cement and Concrete Composites editorial board and then started participating on conference scientific committees as an associate professor as well. Okay, so then, the title of this slide says, when does service become leadership? It's starting to head that way, right? So you see more committee chairs of different things internally and externally, and then broader impact in terms of editorial responsibilities as well. Okay, so as full professor, what did I do? So I've been a full professor since 2014. So I've had 11 years now of 11 years of work in this particular role. And so we have, for example, because our department's separated into areas, we have sort of like mini chairs, administrative chairs within each of the areas. So I became area coordinator, as they call it, graduate advisor for the entire graduate program. Our graduate program has just under 400 graduate students, and the graduate advisor is sort of the overarching student point of contact for the graduate program. I became associate chair briefly during COVID. And then prior to that, I was chair of that university graduate assembly, which provides a lot of exposure to university administrative people and processes. I put associate dean and interim dean in italics in the graduate school. So I have done both of those for a total about a little over 3 years. I put them in italics because I differentiate personally between administration and service. Administration is a job that you get paid to do. And in these particular cases, as an associate dean, it was a 50% time position, which meant 50% of my salary was being paid by the graduate school. And when I was an interim dean, 100% of my salary was being paid by the graduate school. So basically, that means in lieu of your faculty role, whereas service we think of as part of that pie. So that's why I distinguish between the two of them. But what I included them in here to show this sort of trajectory of leadership, that being involved in the graduate assembly, being involved in committees that were highly focused on graduate education on a university level led to opportunities at that university level scale. So it was a leadership trajectory in that sense. I think also being involved in journals can lead to greater service in journals because as you can build a reputation. So if you look from left to right, I started with the ASCE journal, moved to Cement and Concrete Composites, joined ACI's first editorial board that they've ever had, and joined Cement and Concrete Research editorial board. So the trajectory is broader. I also was invited to join the board of ACI and then the executive committee. So it is a trajectory. You don't expect leadership positions necessarily as an assistant professor, but you can build them over time, and you build them over time by, well, I'll say this, but then you'll see the next slide, strategically making decisions and choices that help guide you in that direction. And so this is where I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to give you advice, take it or leave it. Because the very first thing says hindsight is 2020. I'm going to say this, I am quite possibly one of the least strategic assistant professors when I started this job. My friends from graduate school call me the accidental professor because I had absolutely no intention of becoming a faculty member. I don't know what I intended. I had no plans. And everything that I've done is because of this first point, is to seek advice and follow it discriminately. So I had a lot of people giving me advice, often unsolicited, sometimes solicited. We have a strong faculty mentorship program and a faculty evaluation program within our department. People give you advice every year. Sometimes that advice is good. Sometimes that advice is hard, stuff you don't want to hear. And sometimes that advice is absolutely not great. So seek advice and follow it discriminately. I would say with respect to service, and I've said this before and I'll say it again, my primary person giving me advice is Kim Curtis at Georgia Tech, because we graduated the same year, I think, from our PhD, but I did a postdoc and she stepped straight into Georgia Tech. So she was 3 years ahead of me in terms of being in a faculty position, and she's very strategic. So she gave me lots of advice. Some things like, oh, when you accept a new editorial position on a journal, you should drop the other one. Don't accumulate them, especially if you're sending papers out for review, because that's a lot of work. They all have different types of responsibilities. You can swap them out and build. You don't have to keep accumulating because it's too much work. So that's the type of work she gave me. Subu, who was at City College of New York and now is in IIT in India, he pulled me aside at an ACI convention and said, I just went through tenure. These are the people who should write your letters, and these are the people who shouldn't. And you should go meet the people, spend some time at ACI and at ACERS going to meet the people who are going to write you letters. I was like, oh yeah, service in the context of things that'll help your career. And also just getting advice about what committees to join, what types of other activities to do is really helpful in the context of service because it's so poorly defined. The other thing is to make your service efforts count. This is a little bit tricky of an advice because you don't want to be out there constantly saying how great you are. But if you do everything behind the scenes, you're not going to be given credit for what you do. So you need to stand out. You need someone to say, you need to not be just part of the crowd who did the work behind the scenes and has your name on a document. You need to be not necessarily a leader, but you need to be recognized, let's say, by the leader as someone who made exceptional contributions, because then the next time there's an opportunity, you're going to be asked to contribute. So many of the opportunities I've been given is because of this, because people recognized what my role was in the work that was done and offered me another opportunity. I wish we had a system that wasn't so biased, but our system is absolutely biased, and the people who get opportunities are the ones who are noticed. And you're noticed if you do good work. And so that is, I'm not saying to brag about the good work. I'm saying do good work and make sure that the leader who's managing that process recognizes that you did good work so that you get other opportunities. The other thing that I follow is that I don't overextend. I have a superpower. I told this to a friend last week, and I've had it my entire life, which is I am an anti-procrastinator because I don't like stress. That's my superpower number one. My other superpower is, and my daughter and my mother are absolutely anti-procrastinators too, so it is genetic. My other superpower is when someone asks me to do something or when I have something on my plate, I think it's going to take me a lot longer than what it actually takes me. So I end up with free time. It's amazing. So that is just my personality. I don't like stress. I am stress avoidant. I don't overextend, even though it looks like I do, because things take me less time than what I think they're going to. I knock off very small tasks very quickly and spend more time on the larger tasks. But the anti-procrastinating helps. And that helps with the reputation building because you don't let people down. That said, it's okay to fail. I have failed in service. I failed in all kinds of things, but in service, I have failed. I have led committees that just absolutely sucked. And we didn't do what we were supposed to do. And we spun our wheels and we wasted people's time. But I recognized why they failed and I learned from them. And now I don't do that. So it's okay to fail because you learn from it, but make sure you learn from it and don't make that same type of commitment again. The other thing is to ask for help and delegate. Don't do everything yourself if you have something to do, but you have to pick the right people to work with you and trust them to do good work and not micromanage. This is something that, I get to from the administrative work is you can't do all of these things yourself when you're a dean. Have a good team that's working with you that you trust and that gives you advice and actually want to get their work done so you're not constantly following up on them. The same is true of an ACI committee. Make sure that if you're leading an ACI committee, make sure that the other people are doing their work and pick good people who are going to be doing the work. Okay, this is my funny one. And I already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again. So in the US, in college, many students live in dorms their freshman year, and those dorms have something called a resident advisor. My resident advisor in a dorm called Gilbert Adams at Duke University, her name was Jessica. For the life of me, I have no idea what her last name was. But Jessica was lovely. And once every couple of months, she had everyone come over to her room and just pick through her clothes. And the reason she did is she had a policy. When she buys new things, she gets rid of the old ones. When she adds something, she subtracts something else. And it's a really good policy for clothes, but it's also good for workload. So for example, when I took the associate dean position at the university, I spoke to Sharon Wood actually, and some other people about whether I should take the position, and then also what I should do to make space for the position in what I'm already doing. And it wasn't just teaching reduction, but I actually dropped some committees and other obligations in external service to make room for internal administration. So the adding and subtracting is a good policy. If you're an assistant professor, you're probably still in the adding stage, which is okay. But at some point, you're going to need to subtract, and get advice when you do that. So be like Jessica. The other thing, and I say this often, even in a panel a couple weeks ago in Mexico, is to give credit where it's due to other people, loudly and freely. So if that goes back to the second point, be recognized for your contributions. Make sure you recognize others for their contributions too. So if someone has a good point in a meeting, say, oh, as Pranoy just said, blah, 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 blah. You bring up their name and you make sure that they're recognized for the contribution that they had. You don't just repeat it, you give their name as part of it. And that's a really powerful thing, especially if you're in a leadership position, to be able to support other people. It doesn't hurt you. It elevates you too, because it's a process that you're recognizing the team. So it's important to give credit to the people, to cycle back so that they're recognized for their contributions in this world where it is an absolutely biased system of who gets opportunities and leadership opportunities in service. And so you want to be on the positive end of that process. Okay, that's what I have in terms of slides. I'm going to stop sharing, and then we can have a discussion.